There's an interesting story that they say that if you take a frog and you put him in a pot of boiling water, he'll immediately jump out. You know, he gets scalded. You know, any fool would do that. If you take that same frog and you put him in a pot of cool water and put it on the burner and slowly bring it to a boil, he'll never jump out because he can't see the big change. The ranchers are the same way. We're boiling to death, but it's in the same pot we've been in for 150 years, so it's okay. We've always been here. It must be okay. It was good to us 100 years ago, but what's good for us 100 years ago is killing us now.
Social values have changed markedly during the past 2 centuries. In the process, many of the tools ranchers have come to rely on to manage livestock have become prohibitively expensive and socially unacceptable. Today, the challenge is to learn to manage in ways that blend culture, ecology, and economics.
In the United States, you know, everything's based on technology and science. So we drill wells and equip them with pumps, and we have fences. And in a lot of the public lands, that's just not an alternative anymore. People don't want to see the fences. So now more and more we're looking towards animal behavior to control these animals.
We talked about in the past, we've tended to think a lot about the genetics of the situation and to view animals as something that's set in stone. And so you don't tend, if that's your worldview, you don't tend to consider behavior of individuals, stresses on individuals, ways that you can modify environments, including the way that we manage to try to help animals behaviorally. All that's not even considered a part of the problem or part of the way to reach solutions to the problem. On the other hand, if you start to consider that animals are plastic, that they're learning all the time, you start to realize that from conception on, the genotype is in play with the environment, and that's influencing the behavior of individuals, and it starts to give you a whole range of tools that you never had before to manage animals and environments.
Environmental scientists and managers often ignore the power of behavior to transform systems despite compelling evidence. For those willing to understand how the environment interacts with the genome to influence behavior, the potential is virtually unlimited. Bob Budd manages Red Canyon Ranch near Lander, Wyoming for the Nature Conservancy. He manages livestock behavior to wed ranching and conservation.
Probably the big thing that attracted me, and I think the reason that the project has had as much attention as it has, is that it focused on the compatibility between ranching and conservation. The fact that if we don't maintain ranching, if we don't maintain these large open landscapes with use of domestic animals, that we're going to lose habitats for wildlife, we're going to lose migration corridors, we're going to lose a lot of things we don't even know about to other threats that exist outside of things that we can control in ranching and farming. You know, we have probably well over 100 neotropical songbirds that summer here, that nest here, that their reproduction relies on our stewardship of this part of the world, and it's a little piece of it. That's in the riparian areas. You have beaver, you have small mammals, you have amphibians. Moose love riparian areas. We went from having a couple of moose to having 20 or 30 moose. You just have this incredible web of life that hinges around that water source and that cover and all of that vegetation. And we kind of have gone to a period where people said they were all destroyed. Clearly they aren't all destroyed. But I think we also fell way behind the learning curve. We had a curve out there that's going like this, talking about how bad things are, while the curve of how to take care of it wasn't catching up. And we weren't being patient enough and saying, what do we do to enhance these values that we might think are important? Unfortunately, the immediate rush to judgment on those kind of areas was, well, if the problem is partially related to livestock, then we just eliminate the livestock. Well, that's a mutually exclusive solution. So we have to start looking at things that enhance that particular habitat type that we're looking at, that don't damage another habitat type, and that blend the two together. And so we've worked real hard at that. I mean, you could almost call this a riparian project. We've got about 40 miles of streams, we have wetland habitats, and in between that we have big steep hills with no water. And the challenge in finding ways to manage in that setting hasn't been simple, but by the same token, because we didn't already say, oh, it's all gone, it's over, the world has come to an end, and instead said, how do we make it better? And I think that's really a key, Fred. I think you've got to say, here's where we are. Now, how do we make it better? Not here's where we are and here's whose fault it was that we got there. That's the question. Now, how do you manage them? Lots of fence. That's a lot of capital input. That's a lot of maintenance. It may or may not work in some settings. Up here, we've got places that, you know, you're not going to drill a post hole in 10 days, you know, so you've got to start looking at alternatives. And the one that made sense to me was herding, and to that degree, we don't herd cattle. I think it's a real misnomer. People get spooked off because when they hear the word herding, they think we're out there like we're herding sheep. You know, they're all in this little bunch and they bed them at night. Well, that isn't what we're talking about. What we're talking about is having a highly skilled, attentive individual, Travis Clyde, who is with those animals and is able to make decisions based on things that he's taught me. He can tell you every day what time those cows are going to go to water. He can tell you what time they get up, scratch with their hind foot. You know, he knows which cow likes which area of the pasture. That's herding. That's just knowledge of those animals and that pasture and being able to put them where he needs them. And he is totally responsible for that.
When I'm moving them within a pasture, you figure out when they're watering, when they're bedding down, when they're getting up in the morning, when their calves suck. So you figure all that stuff out, and you can set your watch by when they water.
As one thing that he's done is started to identify animals that like it up there. And so we'll go through and start selecting replacement heifers, and Travis will be one who says, she climbs to the top of every mountain. Well, that's a daughter we may want to keep, because usually she's coming back with a whopping big calf anyway. And he'll look and say, she's a bottom feeder. You know, this is a meadow-loving son of a you know, and so those characteristics and that animal behavior, you can start to fashion animals that do things that you need done. It's also controlling time. And I think that really is the essence of what we do. We're in a pasture maximum maybe 30 days. We're in some 5 to 6. We've gone on the forest from a 200 head season-long permit to running 800 to 1,000 head, and they're in pastures now 6 to 8 days where they would have been in there for 100 days. You're going to have some influence on the plant community, and you're going to have some negative influence, but you're going to have a whole lot of positive. And so you start to look at that distribution, and then you start to look at what the animals do. You know, 20 head out there in a big old section pasture pretty much are going to be wherever they want. You take 800 animals and put them in the same place, and guess what? Some of them are going to go up and they're going to be looking at the top of the ridge, and some of them are going to be sneaking under each bush to find some grass.
Probably the neatest thing you see is 850 cows scattered out evenly across it in the morning. There's only water at the bottom of it, and in the mornings they're scattered out clear to the top, going over the top, and they're doing that on their own.
The first thing I would say about the economics, and I'm going to be real upfront about it because I think sometimes people aren't, your animals are going to have to adapt. Okay? Don't think that when you go to herding that you're going to maintain 650-pound calves. You're not. You're now in a numbers game as opposed to a bragging for the highest weight game. But our weights have come up consistently. Our weights this year, we just ran them this morning. Our steers were about 30 pounds heavier than they were a year ago. Our neighbors' weights are down. Our heifers' weights are about 30 pounds heavier. Our neighbors' weights are down. Our yearling weights are higher. And I think we're just turning the curve right now to where those animals understand our system.
They're figuring out that that's where the feed is. And we got the same bunch of cows pretty much every year. So they know where the feed is, and they're learning every year where the best feed is. There's water there, and they're figuring it out.
One thing you'll find out, though, is all of a sudden you have a whole lot more forage than you thought you did. and you've got a whole lot more days of use than you thought you did. And we've sure found that. So there's one balance. When it comes right down to the herder or the rider, I can't think of a practice that pays itself back more. Sick calves are found and doctored. Animals that would depart our possession either in the back of a pickup truck or otherwise don't do that. The knowledge that people have that that person is there and caring for those animals, and he could be over that hill or behind that tree, is very important. But it's the attentiveness to those animals. And the other place you really get paid back is when we start sorting these cattle this fall, and Travis can just rattle off to me, she had a lousy calf last year, she had a crummy calf this year, she spent most of her summer in a place I didn't want her. That's a pretty easy decision to make. And I get rid of a money-losing cow, and I can replace her with something that's going to be better. There are numerous benefits like that that people have to sit down and start to weigh all of the benefits and all of the costs. But the biggest thing I tell people is that since Travis has been here and does such a great job, I can cash out his entire salary on one thing alone, and that's the additional days that we have that we can use these pastures. Those are benefits. Those are things, a lot of them are things nobody ever puts a pencil to, but they add up. The rider will pay for the rider, and probably a lot more.
5,000. Average 47, 40, yeah, I'd say like 47 would be.
Like Bob Budd, Jim Winder, a rancher in southern New Mexico, manages livestock behavior to blend environmental and economic values. As Jim points out, once mastered, behavioral principles become part of the person, not the place, and this knowledge can be used to better the viability of ranchers and the integrity of land.
One unanticipated benefit that I've gotten out of animal behavior and basically the control of the livestock is my relationships with the environmental community. We ranch predominantly on public lands in an area of the nation that has seen a great deal of conflict between ranchers and environmentalists. And there's been a number of ranchers that are just flat run out of business by the environmental community. And what we find is that we're able to address the concerns that the environmental community has for a piece of land. Often it's centered on a particular species, Rio Grande sucker, Rio Grande chub, a bird, or whatever. And what we're able to do is to work with most of the folks and to develop a plan that addresses this. Most species have weak points, like when they're reproducing, et cetera, that you need to avoid. You don't want to step on the eggs, these sort of things. And so once we have this plan, we now have such control of our cows that we're able to avoid these species in this critical time, and it makes a big difference. And what it allows us to do is to have these threatened and endangered species and ranching at the same time. And if anything, it's actually improved our profitability of the ranch, because we're actually creating value for society by privately improving the habitat, where the only other alternative is the Fish and Wildlife Service come in and throw tons and tons of money at a problem. The land managers in the Forest Service and the BLM manage a permittee with the tools the permittee gives them. If all you give them is the tool of stalking rate, they'll cut you. And so we've seen this long history of constant cuts in stalking rates on Forest Service and BLM. Did it improve the riparian area? No, it didn't, because a handful of cows will overgraze the riparian area as long as they're allowed there to stay there at the wrong time. We're trying to tap into a number of different natural behaviors of cows to control them, which is difficult. It requires first understanding the cow. And after spending 37 years of my life on this ranch, I realized that I really don't understand a lot of the things that motivate the cow. But basically what we do is a kind of a reward and also a punishment. And the reward is often supplemental feed. It might be water, it might be salt, it might be fresh pasture, these sort of things. And that's what the majority of what we do is an incentive for the cows. But we also use, besides the carrot, somewhat of the stick. And I say that in a manner that we never injure a cow or hurt a cow or even physically contact a cow, but you can make a cow feel uncomfortable, and that's all it takes. And just recently I bought a ranch that for a number of reasons I really don't want to do cell grazing. I don't want to do the fencing for cell grazing. I still like the concepts, the planning, the control concepts of cell grazing, but without the fences. And so what we're doing is we're trying to control animal movement using waters, and we only allow one water on the ranch to be open at any one time. And the whole ranch is 52,000 acres, and it's pretty rough Rio Grande River breaks country. Fairly poor. It runs about between 5 and 7 head year-long per section. So we have 500 cows and heifers on this 52,000 acres. We only allow them one well that's open, and what we try to do is communicate to them which well it is. And so we're using a siren that will tell the cow this is where the water is open, and right now we're training them to realize that if a water is shut off, it doesn't do any good to stay there. And so we just constantly keep sweeping them. We take them and show them where the water is that's open, and you have them go back and they're standing around the waters. We just keep sweeping them up. And when we first started this, the whole herd was waiting at the back, and then now we're down to only a handful, a few less and a few less, and it's only taken us a few weeks to do this. We try to reinforce the natural herding behavior, and really to bring it back out by using a breed of dogs from New Zealand called Huntaways that gather the cows, and they bark a lot, and they're kind of like a nice predator. They don't eat anything, but they bark and they bring the cows together. And these sort of things are managerial. They're really, it's what's in your brain, it's not what's in your pocketbook. You don't have to go and spend a lot of money doing this. It's hard is because it does take a lot of time trying to understand, why does a cow do that? Cows don't do anything except there's some stimuli that's affecting them. Is it because they're hungry? Is it because there's better food over there? Is it because there's a predator? Why does it do that? And I've spent a lot of time sitting there trying to understand these things, and sometimes I haven't figured it out. What's great then about having control of your animals is you now give the public lands manager almost an infinite number of tools. It's some combination of timing, intensity, and frequency of use. These are the sort of things that will keep a rancher on the land and allow them to move around and work around these other uses. We try to view cows as a scavenger, because a lot of times the people are using the land and buying the land for other purposes, the Nature Conservancy for conservation purposes, but they're not against grazing. And so they're interested in having people come in and graze, but you have to graze around their protection of riparian areas or protection of an endangered species or whatever. So the cows are scavenging. They get the resource very cheaply, but you have to have that flexibility and take her off of her pedestal.
Against a backdrop of constant change, controversies over land, whose resources, and for what use, remain steadfastly unchanged. The solution to the disputes lies in integrating the beliefs and values of people from diverse backgrounds. The challenge is to accept the world as it moves and changes, and to transcend the boundaries we create.
People have to be open to changing and doing something, because the time we're looking at trying to manage a place, if I'm working with a particular family, they may have had it for several generations, but still in ecological time that's just very, very small. So how do you tie that in with looking at things in a very short period of time and how they fit into the long system? So they have to remain open all the time to new things. I've got a little saying by my desk. It says, a mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. And it reminds me, just when I think I know something and things are going well, bang, something happens and it's not working so well. So you have to keep questioning things and keep an open mind, because I work with a lot of people that think that they know that this is the way it is and are very closed to new ideas, and they're just stuck in the same rut. And it's very, very difficult to move on with those kinds of people.
those people that I think are truly being successful, both economically and on a resource, the one issue that I think is really important is those individuals seem to have everybody, everyone, every adversarial group, every supportive group out to their place all the time. And the ones that I see struggling with a lot of issues seem to be very reluctant to have anybody out on their place. And I formulated a decision years ago that has a whole lot to do with the success or failure of a place. And I think it has to do with the openness of the individual operator to just think about different issues and change the way that they're thinking and operating, and because of all those ideas, I think it has a whole lot to do with it.
You have to be inclusive. I don't think you have to roll over and say, okay, because you have this point of view, I'll just accept that. But I think you need to be inclusive. I think you need to be willing to listen to other points of view. I think you have to be able to try things. You know, and I try real hard when someone comes with an idea, and it's hard, you know, and it's sad that it is, but it's hard sometimes to say, okay, try it, or we'll all try it. I don't know why that should be so hard, but it is. But once you start doing it, it isn't so bad. And you know, when you're able to say to someone, you had a great idea, thank you, that feels good too.
Things that are difficult aren't bad. Things that help you to stretch your imagination and improve your skills and build your skills, these challenges are really opportunities. That's how we're going to expand. The ranching in the future is going to be built on these cornerstones. It's not going to be built on the old traditions that my grandfather used.
You can view life as a never-ending series of bifurcations in the face of varying degrees of uncertainty. What's a bifurcation? Those are just the choices that we make day in, day out, the little sort of things. And you come to realize that those choices aren't necessarily set in stone. There's a probabilistic element to those. And so life is not necessarily predetermined either. There's chance entering into this whole thing, and how it plays out is influenced by the choices we make. And those choices are influenced by evolution, by culture, our own interactions as individuals. And the key thing to realize is that by participating in all that, we can influence the outcome of the system as managers with the creatures we deal with, and in our own lives. So what happens if we decide to make behavior an integral part of our management? We come to rely less on technology and tradition, more on behavioral adaptation and innovation. In this arena, there's a new kind of freedom, where it's more satisfying to question than to know, and more rewarding to search than to stay put. And if we continue to question, to search, and to make changes, we'll enhance agriculture by improving the welfare of animals and the integrity of the land.